All right. I'm Jose Salviati, editor at thepeachbasket.net. He's Steve Purciello, longtime educator, vice principal, and athletic director. And this is 13 Rules Overtime. This is a podcast that Steve and I, and really I credit Steve, this is his idea, to set aside some time during the offseason to talk about players that I guarantee you've heard of, but whose game you may not know. Maybe you've never seen them play. We're really going to focus on NBA stars from the 70s and the 80s. What made them special? What player today most resembles that player? And what's Steve's greatest memory about that player? Because he probably got to see them play. I've been talking to Steve for a while now, and I mean, he has memories of watching Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West and Bill Russell, and it's fascinating to me that I didn't get to watch those guys play. So today, we're going to discuss the player who won the second most NBA championships in NBA history. Number one, of course, is Bill Russell. Number two is Boston Celtics Sam Jones, a guy I know, and I admittedly couldn't pick him out of a lineup. I don't know anything about his name. I don't know anything about his game, but I know his name. And so that makes him a perfect topic of conversation for 13 Rules Overtime. Steve, you got to watch Sam Jones. So let's, tell us the story of Sam Jones. I'm going to ask some questions as we go along, but I want to start at the beginning. I know the NBA was different then. I know scouting was different then. The NBA draft was different then. So take us back, right, as far as you can remember, to, who Sam Jones maybe was in college, how he got to the Celtics, and before he got those 10 championships.
Well, first of all, he went to North Carolina Central, and he played for a guy by the name of John McClendon. John McClendon's a Hall of Fame coach, and one of the first head coaches in college and everything else. But anyway, John McClendon, I'll just give you a side note on this. John McClendon coached in the ABL, not the ABA. That only lasted for about 2 years. Coached for the Cleveland Pipers, I believe it was. But anyway, he got fired, but he worked for an interesting owner, a guy by the name of George Steinbrenner, who I think we're going to hear about a few more times over the years. But Sam Jones went to North Carolina Central. Now, back then, teams didn't really get to scout players, and scouting departments really didn't exist. So Red Auerbach ran everything with the Celtics. He did everything in the front office. Red Auerbach went to North Carolina to scout some North Carolina players, which did scout a little bit. But Bones McKinney, the coach down in North Carolina, told him, "You're in the wrong place. The best player is over in Durham." Naturally, we think of Duke. No, in North Carolina Central. And he pointed him towards Sam Jones. Auerbach chose him. Before they chose him in 56, this, by the way, is a 60s player, but in 56, the Minneapolis Lakers chose him in the draft, but they didn't sign him because Jones went back to school. The 4 and 5 year rule and all that. And then Auerbach took him the next year. So he went to Boston. He played there until 69. 10 championships? Russell won 8 straight with the Celtics at Auerbach. Russell, Sam Jones, and K.C. Jones were the only 3 people to be part of that 8 straight championships. Sam Jones was an offensive player. K.C. Jones was the defender in the backcourt for Boston.
Yeah.
Jim Jones, they had a nickname backboard because he shot the ball uniquely. He shot from the wings or anywhere, but usually not dead on, but usually used the backboard to shoot.
Right.
And he was a great, great shooter. Different type of game back then than obviously now. But it was shooter.
Let me ask you about that. A couple of things, because number one, I always remember the great Bill Walton, teaching the use of the backboard to his college players in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, right? And we don't see that in the NBA anymore, right? If you see somebody hit a bank shot, right, we're calling lucky, or you say the bank is open, right? We kind of make fun of it. I do think there are a few players. I know Russell Westbrook likes to take those shots.
Kyrie Irving,
good point, right? But it's weird, right, that we've kind of gone away from that. It used to be a mainstay, and now it isn't. That's just a comment on my part. Feel free to comment. But what I really wanted to dive into was J.J. Redick, the new coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, got into a lot of trouble for saying players in Sam Jones' era were plumbers, right? So I mean,
fireman and fire.
and firemen, right? So I got to ask you that, right? I mean, you saw the plumbers and the firemen play. Who was Sam Jones up against?
Up against Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, another not bad basketball player. There were quite a few. Walt Frazier at the end. He played against Walt Frazier was great. He played against some pretty good players. I mean, on his team on the Celtics, well, every number's retired, but you had Bailey Howell, Hall of Famer. Heinsohn was all Heinsohn. Tommy Heinsohn, check his numbers out. Check his numbers in one of the championships. He had 37 points, I think, in a game 7. I mean, check some of this stuff out, and you'll be amazed. Some of Bob Cousy, I mean, John Havlicek, who extends into the 70s. These were all Celtics. These were great Hall of Fame players, as was Sam Jones. So who did he play against? He played against the best, and he was part of probably one of the great backcourts of all time, not scoring, but between scoring and defense with he and Casey Jones. Bill Sharman, who played with Cousy before the Jones boys became the guards. These are some great players we're talking about, and that's just Boston. There's a guy on the Lakers, your favorite, but Elgin Baylor. I mean, yeah, they're not bad. So I don't know what Baylor was a plumber or a fireman in the offseason. During the season, he was the first guy jumped out of the gym and did some amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of resent what he said. I kind of look at basketball. Players are much better today than they were. However, these were the best of their time. They did have to have regular jobs when the season's over. I think I mentioned Tommy Heinsohn sold insurance,
Right.
and it was over. Why? Because they didn't make a lot of money back then.
Right.
But these guys were, in their time, the best of the group.
Yeah. No, that's a great call out, right? I mean, to the salaries today are mind boggling, right? And I think your mind would be just as boggled if you saw what these guys made back then. It wasn't enough, and they had to go out there and have second jobs and third jobs, maybe. You do what you've got to do. I do want to call out, right? If you are on YouTube, feel free to leave us a note. Nick says, hey to Nick. Thanks for watching. On Twitter, we can't get comments here. We're on StreamYard, but I am following Twitter, so feel free to leave any comments, and we'll absolutely call them out. So, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something else about that before we go on?
I'm going to mention something so you get a perspective on salary and all.
Mm-hmm.
Timberland in the mid-'60s signed for $100,000 a year, which was unheard of. Bill Russell,
Yeah.
in the Paddler, he signed right after for $100,001 because he wanted, the upper hand and presumably would do it. Now, $100,000 back then was like ungodly, and people, like they do now, were complaining about these athletes' salaries.
Sure.
Well, that's always been relevant in the game, but that was something that was there. Now, Sam Jones, I just want to mention a couple of things. Hall of Famer, 8-time, I believe, 8-time All-Star. I think he's 5 times All NBA. Just a great player in a lot of ways. He only averaged 17.6, I think, a game for his career, but also he was selected on the first 25-year team, the 50-year team, and the 75-year team. So it kind of tells you how highly he was considered from that time. He was just a tremendous player.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that a little bit, because this is the thing that, frustrates me in a sense, because you rattle off those statistics and, I'm impressed, but I can't envision this guy, right? I don't know, who he was. So, who was he as a player, right? I mean, what did the Celtics rely on him to do, right? Was he a lockdown defender? Did he guard the other team's best player? Was he going to take the big shot in a big game? What was his game?
Well, first of all, I made a mistake. It was 5-time All-Star, 3 times All NBA. So I apologize. I had it written down and I go back. I didn't know going in. What was his game? He can shoot. He can score. He was a scorer on the team. He first of all, with Boston back initially when he was drafted, he had Cousy and Sharman, 2 great guards, Hall of Famers. Sharman retires. Sam Jones comes in, the shooting guard, and then Cousy retires. Casey Jones becomes in. Those guys had to sit and wait their turn. is my point. Because Boston was so good and so deep.
Yeah.
So it took a while. He was a scorer. He could score, and he did well. Now, only 17 points a game in his career. There's a reason. Boston always prided themselves on never not having anybody in the top 10 in scoring, but in other words, more of a balanced attack. They had so many good players that they were able to do that. So, though Jones might have been the best scorer, I guess, until Havlicek came along, and Havlicek played with him, of course, but until Havlicek came along, he would probably be, Heinsohn and him would be two of the better offensive players they ever had.
You know, when you told me that earlier, that Boston kind of devalued, for lack of a better word, scoring in the sense that they didn't want anybody in the top 10. That just baffled me, but there was a method to that. I think he kind of brushed by that. I think it's important.
The Auerbach believed in balance and all of those things on a team. And he had enough great players. On any given night, Heinsohn could go off for Sam Jones, and Russell didn't quite go off, but he would get his points as well, usually on play up, putbacks and things along that line. But and Russell had a big lefty hook he would use, which was fair. But that, they had so many different people that can put. Then Havlicek came along. Havlicek might have been the first guy to come along and be a top 10 scorer in the league. And that was in the late 60s, into the 70s.
I want to keep the focus on Sam Jones, but I think I just find that so interesting, and I had to take a look. The Celtics had one player in the top 10 this season, right? And that's Jason Tatum, and he came in at number 10. Do you think some of that Red Auerbach mantra or rules, does that still permeate? Is that still alive in Boston?
No, not at all. I think right now, the NBA is different now. You're mass talent. You just and you get stars. Stars win titles. So you get stars. The team with the most stars wins, and generally in the NBA. So I think it's a lot different than it was then. And by the way, you had a great player, Bill Russell, who was willing to give the ball up and really didn't want to score. He just, liked to win. So I think it's a different thing.
Well, keeping the focus then on Sam Jones, but also on today's NBA, I love this question because I think this really brings it home for me, having not seen Sam Jones play. Is there a player in today's NBA game, or maybe, conflating a couple of players to make this Sam Jones player up today, who most closely resembles Sam Jones' game in today's NBA?
It's got to be a pure shooter, and that's difficult because now they have the three. There was no three then. Klay Thompson, in his day, was a pretty good shooter like Jones. He can shoot. Jones wasn't nearly as good a defensive player, but they both can shoot the ball real well. There's other guys that were very good shooters. Jones got his points around the perimeter, 15-footers, 18-footers, that kind of stuff he did. So it's very difficult to compare him with anybody in the NBA today. In my mind, I think of a guy like Lou Hudson, who was back in the 70s, was a great pure shooter. The time in the NBA when guys were pure shooters, but without the three, it was hard to determine how far they were shooting from. Jerry West was a tremendous shooter, and he had great range. Pete Maravich, they were great shooters with great range, but they only got 2 points for those baskets.
Right.
It's hard to really put them with.
And I'm going to hold your feet to fire here, man, because I want to name. Does Klay Thompson come close? Pure shooter. Defender.
Or pure shooter, much better defender. Well, again, teams didn't have what a lot of teams have today. They didn't have 5 guys that could score. So you can get away less with defense. And teams on offense didn't run things where they singled out or went, like Boston went after Doncic throughout the series.
Right.
Well, they didn't do things like that. So they didn't go at people like it was a whole different game. And man-to-man defense was not nearly as intricate as it is today. So there's, it's apples and oranges, I guess, the best way.
And back then you couldn't play zone either. It was all man-to-man, right?
You know what? The zone, that started when Richie Powers was a pretty good referee in his day. And I'm trying to think of the year, but he told the team to play zone and he wouldn't call it. And that's when they really began to go after it. But yeah, I guess they couldn't then, but you can't quote me on that. But everybody play man to man then.
Right. All right. Well, interesting. I mean, what fascinates me about this guy is he's arguably one of the greatest winners. We always hear that about Bill Russell. You don't really think of Sam Jones when you think of the greatest winners in the NBA. But this guy won just as many, minus one. So this guy was spectacular. He had to have been. Let's finish with your greatest memory. You watched him play. I didn't. What's your greatest memory about Sam Jones?
There's a 15-year-old boy laying on the floor by the TV.
Of that.
Probably black and white. I remember right. It was black and white. But anyway, maybe it wasn't.
Rabbit ears?
No, we didn't have that. But
Yeah.
I might have been color. But anyway, in the living room, sitting there, they're playing game 4 of the playoffs against the Lakers. Boston, this is 1969. That's my favorite Celtic team of all time. But this is a team with Russell's last year. Jones is going to retire. He already announced it. Russell won't announce it till August, but he will go out. And they only won 48 games that year. You know, the starters were M. Bryant, who was a journeyman, played with the Knicks for a while. M. Bryant, Sam Jones, John Havlicek, who's their best player, Russell, and Bailey Howell, who was a Hall of Famer near the end of his career. He played with a bunch of teams, but didn't finish, but was near the end with Boston. They had those 5. Don Nelson, who was just coming along, was off the bench, and he plays a part in this. Anyway, so now they're in game 4. They're down, I believe, 88-87 with 7 seconds left, I believe. Anyway, Boston calls timeout. About the ball, Lakers are winning. Lakers are up 2-1. So if the Lakers win this game, we go back to LA, the series is over. Well, you've got it right there.
Yes.
M. Bryant about to take the ball in bounds.
Number 7.
He'll throw it into Havlicek.
And you mentioned this guy was a journeyman, right? This is not an old-time great Celtic.
No. They picked him up there in the year they needed a point guard. And I believe Larry Siegfried might have been around then, but he never really panned out as well as they thought he would. They've got Sam Jones taking out. Are you going to play this?
Let's go. Here we go. Tell me when to stop.
I believe that's Mendy Rudolph, who was one of the greatest refs of all time because he was lefty, throwing the ball to
Nelson comes in. Go.
That's a very important point because Sam Jones know that. I'll mention that after.
Okay. Bill Russell out. Who was the player coach, right?
Yes. But by the way, who replaced him? Don Nelson.
Okay. All right.
Nelson will play center. How will they run it? Let's see. It goes out of bounds. Then they have to check. Clock is moving. 5 seconds. To Sam. This one he put up.
Does this bring out the 15-year-old in you?
Oh, I jumped off the floor. But the point being on that was there's a couple interesting things to it. Jones ran like baseline around on the play and came around, and they ran 3 guys across the foul line to run a screen. And it was interesting. When he shoots it, it goes off the front rim first. I thought he missed it. And I was like, oh. The other interesting thing, after the game, I remember this well, they asked him about it. And Sam Jones said, I knew if I get it to the rim, Russell would be able to tap it in or maybe get the rebound. The problem was he didn't know Russell was out of the game.
Right.
Just another piece to it. And you got Wilt there. And you're not getting many rebounds with Wilt on the court. So it was a very interesting thing that he did that. But that shot tied the series at 2-2. Boston went back to LA. LA blew out Boston. And then Boston won game 6 at home. And then beat them in the famous balloon game in game 7 in the Forum.
I hate to ask, but there might be some people. We got some significant 12 people listening, watching right now. Welcome to all of you. Again, if you're on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment. If you're on Twitter, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. But some of those folks may not know what the balloon game is. So I am from Los Angeles.
I'll be glad to explain it. They
Go
played
ahead.
game 7 in the LA Forum, which was just about brand new. That Ken Cook was the owner. He thought for sure, because he bought Wilt in, and they were going to win a title. You had Jerry West and Wilt. If you look at Jerry West's numbers in game 1 and 2, he was just one off in that series. But, in fact, he was the MVP of the series. So they were thinking as soon as the game's over, the balloons will fall, and we're the champions, and all that beautiful stuff. Well, the game ends, Boston wins, and if you ever get a chance, look at that part on YouTube because they're back where Jack Twyman was the announcer interviewing the Celtics and so on. But they get a guy with a stogie in his mouth who was the general manager of the Celtics. His question was, what are they going to do with those balloons? Which was just, it was Auerbach and his arrogant self. It was Boston at their arrogant self. It was just perfect. It was just a perfect way to end it. I know a lot of Laker fans might not have enjoyed it, but it was just great. It was just a great thing. And it just made the game more fun for that 15-year-old watching the game.
And none of that would have been possible. And it's important to note without Sam Jones' shot we just saw.
That's right.
I mean, we would have gone down 3-1 at that point.
It would have been beaten in 5. To win game 7 there, so many things had to go right. Don't forget, that was game 7 where Will took himself out of the game with a knee problem or whatever with 5 minutes left or so. Lakers made a comeback, cut it pretty close. Nelson's miracle shot off the back rim, straight up, straight down, which I had never seen before. I've seen it a couple times in the last couple of years. Never before. When that happened, like, oh my God, because Boston in that play, that 24-second, they were at nothing, and they finally found Jones, and he shot it literally right before the buzzer. That was down the stretch of the game, and Chamberlain then wanted to go back in, wasn't allowed to go back in by Coach Van Bradenkoff, who got fired after the series. There were so many things that went on that series, and the reason I loved that Boston team, you took a bunch of older players like M. Bryant, and you went out and won the series. Another interesting thing, I believe Russell played the whole game, as Wilt usually did also, but Russell played the whole game, I believe, but he played in the 40 minutes. Think about that today. You don't see that. Russell's a 34-year-old who was at the end.
Yeah.
So, you get a good picture of the NBA then. It was fun to watch.
I think you want about the plumbers and the firemen of that era, but they played 48 minutes. Nolan Ryan threw 200 pitches. I mean, they were spectacular, and they were spectacular for as long as they needed to be spectacular. Which I don't know if that's a good thing about today's game or a bad thing about today's game, but it's a fact.
Well, it was just fun, and again, these guys aren't as good as they are today, but the competitiveness and so on. I mean, if you've read Jerry West's book, I mean, how this stuff ate at him. And I don't know if the players of today, I don't think Luka is pouting over that playoffs. And it's not a knock on Luka as much as, I don't know if it was as competitive today as it was. It was a whole, Wilt took a pounding, by the way, for losing that series. And, was beat up for it. And the press just nobody gets a piece taken from them like they did back then is the point I'm. And by the way, West did not have a title yet at that point. That was as close as you're going to get. Yeah, they'll get in 2 years.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that. I'm sure Jerry West will be on the list of players that we discussed. There's another one I didn't get to see play, but man, I got to see a lot of him when I went to the games. Because obviously he was just a phenomenal executive.
Check out what he did in the first 2 games of the 69 series. He was unstoppable. Havlicek went off in the first 2 games, I guess in the 40s, but West was in the 50s. It's just like, oh my God. And the Lakers won the first 2 games in that series.
Well, we will definitely have Jerry West on as a topic of conversation. Please, man, if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed learning about Sam Jones from somebody who saw him play, like, comment, add us, subscribe, do whatever you need to do, man. It all helps us. This is something that we enjoy doing. This is something Steve and I just do normally. Well, we talk basketball, so it's pretty cool to do it with you all. And hopefully that you learned a little something about the second greatest NBA champion in terms of rings. He's got one for each finger, man. Sam Jones. Let us know who you want us to discuss. Somebody that you've been curious about. We brought up Jerry West. We can rattle off a whole bunch of Elgin Baylor, George Gervin, John Havlicek, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete Maravich. Let us know if there's a particular player you want to hear about, and we'd be happy to talk about it. We're going to do these shows every week through the NBA offseason. And then when the season begins, we'll likely pivot back to 13 Rules Random NBA Thoughts. But we might still be doing this because this is fun and there's just a wealth of players out there to discuss. But thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. Again, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And join us next week. We don't know who we'll be talking about yet, but we'll be talking about somebody on 13 Rules Overtime. Steve, thanks.